Abzan Revolt looks to gain incremental advantage over the course of a game, utilizing both minor and major synergies within the deck, putting to use various uncommon keywords such as Dredge, Threshold, Delirium, and of course the namesake of the deck, Revolt, which are the uninitiated reads that if a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn, you'll gain some sort of bonus effect when it comes into play. Knowing this, we can include cards in our deck that want to be sacrificed such as Fume Spitter, Brindle Boar, and Vessel of Nascency to easily turn Revolts on. The primary goal of the deck is to dump cards into the graveyard with Dredge to fuel our Threshold and Delirium while keeping up in card advantage to eventually overwhelm our opponent with big 2-cost creatures. Abzan Revolt is a fun deck that gets access to some of the most least used cards and keywords in the game such as Threshold, Delirium, and Revolt to assemble its game plan and win. Getting right into the creatures, we have 3 Moldgraf Scavengers and 4 Werebears. Both of these creatures serve a relatively similar purpose, gaining stats when we meet their graveyard requirements. Though they do each have their own strengths and weaknesses, Werebear of course is a mana dork at heart and can help us if we're stuck on lands or need to tap it for a color we might be missing. Moldgraf Scavenger, or occasionally referred to as the Pauper Tarmogoyf, gives us an early blocker and unlike Werebear, does not die to bolt. Next we have the creature that most consistently fuels our graveyard, Stinkweed Imp. A 1/2 with Death Touch and Dredge 5 gives us the simple means of turning on both Threshold and Delirium. This is where the synergies in the deck begin. Getting a Stinkweed Imp into the graveyard early can mean within just a few turns of dredging, you'll be ready to play overstated 2-drops to your heart's content. Getting into the cards that give this deck its name, we have 3 Countless Gears Renegade and 3 Silkweaver Elite. Renegade can put 2 bodies on the board as early as turn 2 to contest anything your opponent might have. And Silkweaver Elite acts as a Phyrexian Rager with no downside and having the added benefit of being a creature with reach, giving you the power to block any flyers your opponent might throw at your face. But of course, to gain these effects, we need to activate Revolt, which we have the ability to do in the form of cards that give us bonus effects when we sacrifice them, such as Vessel of Nascency, Evolving Wilds, Fume Spitter, and my personal favorite niche card that can sacrifice itself, Unbridled Growth, which for 1 green allows us to enchant any land to have it able to tap for any color. We can also sacrifice it to then get a draw. Another card released in Aether Revolt, it does a great job of turning on our cards with Revolt on curve. Fume Spitter is there to be a cheap blocker and give us the option to play a creature with Revolt on turn 2. Vessel of Nascency lets us look at the top word cards of our deck as long as we pay 1 and a green to sacrifice it to then add an artifact, creature, or enchantment into our hand. And Evolving Wilds simply being a free way to turn on Revolt as well as grabbing us any basic land from our deck. We then also have 3 Thraben Inspectors, while being a cheap creature has the benefit of giving us a clue token, which we can sacrifice to turn Revolt on later turns. We also run 4 1-ofs, 1 Brindle Boar, Battlefield Scrounger, Nest Invader, and Grim Harvest. Starting with Brindle Boar, for 2 mana and 1 green, at any time we can sacrifice it to gain 4 life. While this card does have some synergy with Revolt, it's not the main reason why we run it. Brindle Boar gives us an option for recursive life gain with the next card on this list, Grim Harvest. For 1 and a black, we can add any creature from our graveyard to our hand, and more importantly I'd say, if it's in our graveyard, when a creature hits the bin from our field, we can pay 2 and a black to add it to our hand. This deck amasses a lot of lands in the early game, and this card can be a nice mana sink to give us recursive threats in the later stages of the game. It's also a card that doesn't hurt to mill it with Dredge, which is definitely a big benefit. Next we have Battlefield Scrounger. For 3 and 2 green, we get a 3/3 that lets us once each turn return 3 cards from our graveyard back to the bottom of our library, as long as we have Threshold online. Sometimes games go so long that we need more threats to draw into, and our final 1-of is a lone Nest Invader. When it comes into play, we get a 0/1 token that we can sacrifice at any time to get a colorless mana. This is just a simple way to turn on our Revolt cards. And for the final 6 non-lands we have in the deck, it's all removal. 2 Chainer's Edicts, 2 Deadweight, and 2 Ghastly Demise. Starting with Deadweight, for 1 black, we can enchant a creature to give it -2/-2. One of the great aspects of Deadweight is that even if the creature you enchant immediately dies, since enchantments are permanents and Deadweight would leave the field along with the creature it's killing, it turns Revolt on for the turn. We then have Ghastly Demise, which in our deck reads destroy target non-black creature with how fast we can dump cards into the bin. Chainer's Edict gives us non-targeting removal that can still be useful even if we lose it to a Dredge. And to finish out the list, we have our lands. 8 forests, because we're going to want to see green mana on either turn 1 or 2. If we're able to get down an Unbridled Growth on turn 1, it means on any future turn we can have a land that taps for any mana and lets us play any Revolt creature whenever we please. 4 plains, because while we run very few creatures that need white mana, we don't mind having the option to play a Thraben Inspector on turn 1 or the possibility of a turn 2 or 3 Countless Gears Renegade. And then we have 2 swamps, because this is the mana we're going to need the least in the early game, as well as 4 Evolving Wilds and 4 Jungle Hollow. These lands, while slow, give us the fixing we need to cast our black removal when it's needed, or as mentioned earlier for Evolving Wilds, the inherent sacrifice synergy for our Revolt creatures. This deck has a lot of flexibility in pretty much every aspect of the list. Maybe you want more cards that you can sacrifice? Well, Seal of Doom gives you that option along with being relatively flexible removal. Or Seal of Strength, a 1-green enchantment that you can sacrifice to pump any creature for +3/+3. Or maybe you want bigger threats, which you can have in the form of Gurmag Angler or Hooting Mandrels. There's a lot of options to take with this deck as the gameplay is relatively non-linear. The ideal for Abzan Revolt was to build a Pauper good stuff deck utilizing cards with the Revolt mechanic. I went through quite a few variations with this deck, some that didn't even utilize the graveyard at all, but this was the list I found the most fun and wanted to expand upon the most. The deck primarily plays a relatively slow game plan with creatures that get better the longer the game goes, with eventually overwhelming your opponent with big creatures and virtual card advantage. Though to get to that point we have to survive, which we can generally do with our various removals and blockers. Late in the game, if your opponent is attempting to exhaust you of your creatures, you can recover a Grim Harvest from our graveyard that we might have sent there with Dredge. Since we're running so many lands with relatively cheap creatures, we can afford to pay the recover cost of Grim Harvest, and with the way we sacrifice our creatures, we can just grab back the Grim Harvest with recover whenever we please. While I'd say this deck isn't all that competitive, it's certainly a lot of fun, and I'd say it's definitely worth giving a try if you want to play something unique in Pauper. But that's gonna be it for my Abzan Revolt deck tech. Tell me what other decks you want to see in the comments, as I plan to make more deck techs. And if you want to see more videos like this one, drop a like and subscribe. It helps a lot and shows that the Pauper community wants more of these types of videos. But tune in next time, and thanks for watching.